Don, thanks for being here. Please introduce yourself and tell us who you're affiliated with.
Yeah, I'm Don Dodge. I do developer relations at Google, a small company you may have heard of. Before that, I was doing the same job at Microsoft. So I've been doing this for about 10 years now.
That's phenomenal. But I also understand you're an entrepreneur in your own right.
Yes, before Microsoft and Google, I was on the executive team of 5 startups. Two or three of them you may know. The first one was Forte Software. That was back in the 80s, and it went public when you could take companies public, and was later acquired by Sun Microsystems. And then I was at Alta Vista, and we built Alta Vista. I was in the research labs. We spun it out of the research labs, made it a separate company, and did pretty well. We were the biggest search engine on the internet for a long time. And then Napster, the music site. It was there for a while until the courts shut us down. Interestingly, Napster the movie is debuting here at South by Southwest tomorrow.
Great.
So 13 years later. So a lot of the Napster people are here in Austin for the premiere of the movie. So that'll be interesting.
I must see that. So you are an entrepreneur through and through your DNA, through your activities. Tell me, is there anything that stands out to you about all the ventures that you've been involved in? And indeed, even the bigger venture you're involved in today?
Well, I'm also an angel investor, so I'm invested in 26 companies right now, and I work with Google Ventures, and we do investments there. So I see a lot of startups, a lot of companies. And I think it's easier today to start a business, to start a company, than it has ever been before. I see literally 600 or 700 companies a year. So it's much easier to start a company than ever before, but at the same time, it's much harder to build a business than it has been before, because it takes a lot to rise above the noise and be recognized and to attract an audience and to build a real business. So while it's easier to start a company and easier to raise capital, it's harder to build a business. You really have to have a business idea. The days of starting a company and building an audience and worrying about revenue later, those days are largely over.
Is that not a healthy thing, though, do you think? Or would you say the pendulum has swung a little bit too much the
No, I think it's a healthy thing. It's great to plant 1,000 flowers and see which ones bloom and which ones grow. That's great, and it's always been that way. What I'm saying is it's easier now to start those flowers growing, but it's harder to build big, massive businesses than it was before.
Well, and perhaps some of the marketplaces have been taken, and yet we also are always creating new marketplaces.
Right. So here's the way I look at it. Consumer businesses, there are usually, like Facebook or Twitter or anything that's consumer oriented, there are usually 1 or 2 winners and 100 broken hearts. But on the enterprise side, it's different. You can have 100 winners on the enterprise side, and they can all be worth $10 to $50 million and do pretty well. So I think your odds of success are better starting a company that's focused on enterprise, where the revenue is, rather than on consumer, where the eyeballs are.
Fascinating. Yet there's been such an emphasis on getting a community where the eyeballs are, as opposed to the enterprise side. And we definitely see a lot of that at South by Southwest.
Right, right. Well, it's easier to start a company on the consumer side. It's not rocket science. Everyone is a consumer, so everyone understands how consumers think. So it's easy to start a company on the consumer side, easy to understand the value to the consumer, but it's incredibly difficult to get the scale that you need in order to make those businesses work.
Do you think this has something to do with the availability of capital and how the capital markets have changed, and that the cost of getting a product together on the consumer side can be much more capital efficient often than the enterprise side?
Absolutely. It's so easy to start a company on the consumer side. You can bootstrap it, get a little friends and family money, and get something out there and get it usable. and then go to angel investors or VCs to raise money. So the capital side is very, very easy, and consumer-oriented companies are pretty capital efficient. So you can build them for a pretty small amount of money. Enterprise, on the other side, is more capital intensive. The sales cycles with enterprises can be longer. But I would suggest that you can get to revenue faster with an enterprise-oriented company than you can with a consumer company. So I say the eyeballs are on the consumer side, the dollars are on the enterprise side.
Fascinating. And the size of company and growth potential is on the enterprise side.
Right, like I mentioned, on the consumer side, you might have 1 or 2 winners in a category,
Right.
and the rest of them never get anywhere. On the enterprise side, you can have 10 or 20 winners in a category that are each doing $10 to $50 million and are significant businesses.
It seems that we were, back in the early 90s, we were firmly footed on the enterprise side,
Right.
especially in the software field. That pendulum swung all the way during the dot-com bubble to more dot-com of anything you could see on the consumer side. And then we've had this, shall I say, the hills and valleys of the first decade of this century, swinging back and forward between a little bit consumer, a little bit enterprise. Where do you think we're going as for successful entrepreneurial businesses as we move forward?
Well, the last 10 years most of the venture capital has gone to consumer-oriented companies for the last 10 years. And enterprise really hasn't had much innovation or a lot of venture capital focused in that space. Part of that was driven by the dot-com boom and the web. Recently, it's driven by smartphones. So smartphones and apps. There were no such thing as apps 5 years ago. So apps have taken off to where there's hundreds of them every day, new ones every day. So that has led to an explosion of capital and interest on the consumer side, but very, very few of those are actually making any money. Now I see venture capitalists focusing on enterprise markets, and there's actually a confluence where you're taking consumer kinds of features and smartphone kinds of features and user interfaces applied to enterprise applications. So you see a confluence of taking social features and putting them on enterprise applications. So CRM is a good example, and the new term social CRM. So it's taking the customer relationship management software from the enterprise and adding on the social kind of inputs like Twitter, Facebook, Google+, LinkedIn, all of those sort of things, and having more social consumer type interfaces on enterprise applications.
That's great. Tell me, you have a very big and important job at Google. As we talk about this specific aspect, can you share with us a little bit about what you're doing at Google and how this may be applying to your activities?
Yeah, I work in developer relations at Google. So I help developers who are building applications using Google technologies, try to help them be successful, give them access to new code, solve problems for them. The other part of my job is working at Google Ventures, and that's where we do investments in startups. And then a third piece of what I do is I see 500 to 700 startups a year, so I either try to help the developers build their applications if they have those sorts of problems, or Google Ventures invest in these startups where I see really great opportunities. Or the third area is acquisitions. So Google does a lot of acquisitions, some very large and many, many very small. So I'll occasionally see startups that are doing very interesting things that Google should acquire.
Okay.
So the common thread is I'm always dealing with startups and speaking at conferences and working with angel investors and VCs and that kind of thing.
And you are one of all those things. You are an entrepreneur, you are an angel investor.
Yes.
This must make life very interesting for you.
It is. It's the best job in the world. Don't tell anybody, because it's a great job, and I get to see a lot of startups and invest in startups and live vicariously through other people who are building their companies. So it's a great job.
It's a fabulous job. We at the University of Texas are becoming more and more entrepreneurial, as is our student base. Is there anything in the education field that you think we should be aware of? Is there any great things you've seen at universities that merits talking about as it applies to entrepreneurial endeavors of individuals that are still studying?
Well, the big universities are the hotbed of activity for startups. It's where most of them, they start at universities. So Stanford and MIT and Harvard and UT and all these other campuses, most of them now have incubators of their own, which is a fairly new thing. So that's really a great thing. I try to visit as many of those incubators as I can to find the hot ideas, the hot engineering teams, and get involved early. So I try to visit as many university incubators as possible. So there are great programs going on, and it's good to see universities focusing on entrepreneurship and helping them get started while they're still in school. I think it's a terrific thing.
Well, we are very pleased to have Google here in Austin, and exceptionally pleased that you have been able to come here to South by Southwest. I'm sure it's not your only visit, but if there's anything that you would ask for today that would help you in what you're doing at Google, what would that be?
Well, in my role, it's finding startups that are doing interesting things, leading edge things using Google technology. So working with Android, building new apps on Android, or Google Maps, or Chrome, or the Chromebooks, or YouTube, or there's so many things that we're into. So I'm trying to find startups and great ideas built on Google platforms and then help them be successful.
Great. What more can an entrepreneur ask?
Yeah,
From one
we're here to help.
entrepreneur to another entrepreneur out there. Thanks so much for being here today.
Well, thank
John.
you very much.
Appreciate it.